being that Russia is a nuclear superpower and the history of Russian wars, I mean, there's such a long history of sacrifice and death, and it's like they're accustomed to it in a way.
Oh, we can do better than that. We can make you a lot more depressed.
Okay.
So let me give you two things. Number one, the Russians are relatively casualty immune. They fight in an area where they fight with numbers. They've never been technologically advanced versus their peers. They've always just thrown bodies at it. So there has never been a conflict in Russian history where they have backed out without first losing 500,000 men. We're at about 100,000 now. We have a long way to go before the Russian military breaks.
So the Russians have lost roughly 100,000?
That's the best guess.
How many Ukrainians have been lost?
Probably about a third of that. But that is a third in terms of military forces. In terms of civilians, we really don't know. It could be as much as 250,000 at this point. We just don't know.
Really?
Well, the data exists on the other side of the front line. All we know are about what has happened in the territories that have been liberated. And if you think of things like Bucha and Izium, German radio intercepts told us as far back as May that there were at least 70 places behind Russian lines that had suffered massacres like Bucha. And when we've had additional liberation since then, it corroborates that general assessment. Well, so that's piece one that you can be a little depressed about. The piece two, the Russians see this as an existential fight for their survival. They feel if they don't get those blocking positions, they're doomed. And they're probably right. But we now know that the Russians are fighting so badly. They're doing much worse than the Iraqis did in 1992. If we had a direct fight now between NATO and Russia, it would be 1,001 casualties. And I don't know anyone at the Defense Department who's happy about that. Because if the Russians see this as an existential conflict, and they know they can't hold a match to NATO, then nukes are their only option. The primary reason why everyone in the West has gotten shoulder to shoulder on this is they know that if Ukraine falls and Poland's next, there will be a direct fight, the Russians will lose, and then there will be a general nuclear exchange. So there's plenty of really solid reasons to root for the Ukrainians on this one. The Russian position is that our demographic structure is in such diseased and aged and terminal decline. The Russian state will be turning the lights off sometimes between 2050 and 2070 anyway. They've had a series of big melon scoops out of their birth rate throughout the history. World War I, World War II, the collectivizations under Stalin, Brezhnev's mismanagement, Khrushchev's mismanagement, the post-Cold War collapse. And a lot of these stack on top of each other. And the biggest one stacked on top of the post-Cold War collapse. So there are more Russians in their 50s than their 40s and their 30s and their 20s and teens. And then they lie about the data of the teenagers on down. Which means that there aren't enough Russians that have been born in the last 30 years to carry the ethnicity forward much farther. And so they're thinking if they can forward position their military and plug those gaps now with their last generation of young people, then they can kind of die on their own terms 50 years from now. One way or another, this is the end of Russia. The question is whether it dies in the long term on their terms or in the shorter term when they're completely unmoored. Because if they fail to secure those borders, then they've got a 2,000-mile open border with countries they consider to be hostile, and they have no way of moving troops around in a way that would allow them to defend it. They'd just be waiting for somebody to come over and knock them over.
You believe that they're aware of this, that they can't survive past 2050, 2070, right, whatever it is?
I think that's what's been driving them, because 2022 was the last year where they had a sufficient number of people in their 20s to even attempt this. So from my point of view, not only did the war always have to happen, it always had to happen by now. Russia has always been poorly managed and authoritarian, but under Putin it's taken a much darker turn because of the nature of the end of the Cold War. If you remember back to 1982, there was a coup in the Soviet Union. And Chernomyrdin and Andropov and Gorbachev were FSB, well, then KGB agents who basically overthrew the old system of Brezhnev and took over and tried, because they were the only ones who really had a full understanding of what was going on. They controlled the information. They were not able to save the system, and so it broke. And Putin is the successor to that legacy because he was also in the KGB. And we're now in an environment that between the terminal demographic structure of the Soviet/Russian system and Putin's personal paranoia. So he's gone through and purged what was left of the KGB, FSB, of anyone who has personal ambitions to succeed him. We're left with an entire political elite of only about 130 people. And Putin has removed anyone who has leadership ambitions. Now, they all see the world the same way. They all kind of agree with Putin on what's at stake here. But it does mean that when this generation is gone, this is it. This is all the leadership talent that the country has. Even if Russia did have a replacement generation coming up, and it doesn't, he's taken steps to make sure that they can't challenge him. And so any sort of leadership talent has left or been killed. Well, they're obviously not thrilled with the way the things are. They're using one bit of propaganda after another to justify it, saying that, we're fighting all of NATO, or demons are involved. That was my personal favorite.
Demons?
Oh, yeah, when it came to the Kherson offensive and it became clear that there was more going on than just NATO weapons, the Ukrainians actually knew what they were doing. They changed the line from that these are all Nazis to these are actually gay demons.
Please explain the gay demons.
Oh, I don't know if I can explain it. I'm just saying that this is the official line right now. So we have homosexual demons fighting us in Ukraine. Not really. The guy who's in charge of the Orthodox Church is a Putin crony. Kirill is his name. He's kind of like the Eastern Orthodox Pope, if you will. And he has been a partner with organized crime and with Putin since the beginning. And so he is coming up with ever more creative approaches to the propaganda. And so this is a way of, how can I say this without pissing off half of the people listening? Imagine Trump using his influence with evangelical Christians to come up with a theological reason why something didn't go his way. It's kind of the equivalent of that. And so gay demons is what he came up with.
Gay demons.
Yes, and they ran with it. So that's on state propaganda now.
What's the epicenter of the gay demons?
Oh, Kiev, obviously.
Kiev.
Yeah, so we've got a Jewish Nazi gay demon.
And the scary rumor is that Putin has cancer.
Or Parkinson's is one I've heard as well.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I don't know what it is. He's clearly on steroids, but, that could mean a whole lot of things. Yeah, he looks very, not just flushed, but puffy.
Yeah.
And that's kind of a classic too many steroids in your system issue. Steroids keep you going in a time when you should probably be laying down is really the kind of the bottom line. Whether he's medicated, over-medicated, or medicated because of medical reasons, we really don't know. He's not in great health. That is obvious. And for someone who has been the shirtless horseback rider in the propaganda videos, that's a real problem. He's visibly wearing bulletproof or bullet-resistant vests, even around his own propaganda people. There was this great piece that came out that I saw last week where it was all the propaganda shots that he's taken with the soldiers' mothers and on the front and with the tech people and in the intelligence. And it was like the same 12 people were in every single shot, just in different outfits. And even with those people, he's wearing his ballistic vest. Putin has so thoroughly purged that what's left of the intelligentsia, there's only 130 of them, and there's probably only one of them who would have the guts to throw a coup. That's the Rosneft CEO. Rosneft is their oil monopoly. Igor Sechin is his name. He used to be a gun runner during the Soviet period. He's got the guts to pull it off. But if there's anything that the other 129 agree, is that Sechin's an and he should be shot on sight if he kills Putin.
Oh, Jesus.
Yeah, so there's no immediate pretender to the throne here. For the Europeans who have been dealing with the Russians for 3 centuries, this is kind of par for the course.